Hello Internet, I'm Jackie Fox, and today I want to talk about a particular issue, and not only an issue, but I think a great resource that we can tap into through cyber socialism. However, I do want to point out that this involves me talking about a community that I am not myself a part of. And today that community is going to be the disabled in America. Now, I don't really like the term disabled. It makes it seem like a person is an invalid, and it makes it seem like they just can't do anything. Disabled means non-functional, and this isn't so much the case. It's more so that whatever their issue is, that whatever the complication to their health or mental well-being may be that they might live with, they cannot easily be plugged into the conditions that American workers are expected to endure in the modern capitalist system. Basically, if your health is such that they would have to make special accommodations for you in, say, a given factory, then you're considered by American standards to be disabled. Now, this isn't exactly how the system works, and this isn't really a deep dive into American policy, but this is roughly how the system came about and what it really means to the people whom it describes. Because, essentially, the government has made the call here that while many accommodations that can be made for certain types of disabilities in the workplace that, say, an issue that may cause you to get very tired very easily, means that you might have to take additional breaks. But America has decided that it would be too disruptive to accommodate you, and to provide and mandate that workers, especially in your scenario, be able to take extra breaks. So instead, what they've decided to do is just to pay you not to work. It is worth pointing out that some accommodations may be required by law to help integrate the disabled into the workplace. But let me cut to a disabled North Carolina Amazon worker to give you an idea of how that tends to work out for people.
Everything is slavery time. You go eat, you gotta be back 30 minutes. So by the time you go through the metal detectors and the security and the metal detectors go off and they pull you to the side, they gotta go through your bags, half of your lunch gone. They knew I needed accommodation. They said packing would be the best place for you because you're in a wheelchair, you got more space, you'll be in your own area. We'll lower the desk, we'll have everything for you. But it took about 4-5 months. I got a write-up over underperformance, which y'all didn't read none of my accommodation inquiries. Lower my desk, make sure everything fits my accommodation. The accommodation supposed to protect us, but it don't. Because we still get treated as if there's nothing wrong with us. The managers don't know the law of disability law, so y'all just throwing them out there and they giving these people write-ups, which can cause a big lawsuit. They basically violating people's rights.
Now, to some, one of those things might sound like a really good solution to this problem, but really it also creates its own problems. And I think that a lot of commentators that try to talk about these problems first tend to be from the right wing and tend to see things systemically in a completely different way than I do, because the problem that this creates, at least how I understand it, I have to relate back to Marxism. And I don't exactly know how you would create a framework to talk about this from a right-wing perspective, but to me, it comes back to what Marx said about alienation. So Marx talks about a lot of types of alienation. But one that's most often referenced is the alienation from labor that he began to observe in capitalist practices even before the American Industrial Revolution. So you can only imagine how much worse a lot of the things that he was describing have gotten as we've gone through the American Industrial Revolution. And all of the things that came with that, in addition to modern neoliberalism, surveillance capitalism, the rise of big tech, and the gig economy. Like, all of these things have made this issue a little bit worse. But essentially, it's that a person no longer has the ability to take pride in their labor that they once did, because now they are more disconnected from the satisfaction of having done a good job. See, traditionally you'd be able to put your name on your hard work, or you would do your service directly for the person as yourself, and this would contribute to your good name. It would give you something to be proud of and a legacy to look back on. Incidentally, this doesn't really apply if you work for a brand, because all of your efforts ultimately will be benefiting the good name of the brand and not yourself. Think about it this way. You have a plumbing issue where you live, and your neighbors have told you that Bill, who owns a local plumbing business, did great work for them at a great price. He really addressed all of their concerns, took his time to make sure they were satisfied. So you look up Bill, you find his company through his name, and through the advice of your neighbors, you call him up. You have a great experience, and the next time somebody says something about a plumbing issue, you're going to say, hey, I called this guy named Bill, and I think I still have his number. Let me get you in touch with him. This builds a reputation for Bill as someone who is an excellent plumber in the community, and Bill can bank on a certain amount of satisfaction as well as job security from having this positive reputation. And this is something that he himself owns in his own name. It is a product of his labor other than just profit, but more of the human satisfaction layer that comes from labor. In contrast to that, a lot of trades, which I didn't pick as an example for no reason, I do feel like working directly with someone with your own business is a way of countering alienation, or working a job where you can directly interface with customers and still feel proud of what you do. But less and less jobs allow us to feel that pride anymore, and it doesn't solve the problem that well. In addition to that, it is really difficult to start small businesses, especially in landscapes that happen to be monopolized and dominated by big corporations. So let me put it this way. What's more likely nowadays is that I'm aware of a brand. Let's say Roto-Rooter in this example, and instead of asking my neighbors or calling Bill or doing any of that, maybe I reflexively Google local plumbing and I see an ad for Roto-Rooter, and I call them out and they send somebody out, and maybe it's Bill. But in my mind, this is no longer going towards Bill's reputation. Should Bill provide me excellent service or not? Ultimately, the way I'm going to remember this interaction is good or bad in relation to Roto-Rooter, and not Bill and his reputation as an individual, and that probably doesn't factor much into this equation for me. And additionally, when my neighbors ask me who did the great job, I'm less likely to remember Bill's name and just say, well, I called Roto-Rooter. As another example, everything that you're wearing right now was probably made in a country that's been imperialized by America or some part of Europe or maybe even China. And through this cheap labor, we get goods and maybe we really like them. Like, for example, I wear glasses now and I greatly appreciate the person who made my glasses. But even thinking about the customer experience of purchasing said glasses, I interacted with like 3 or 4 different people. So there's not even like an individual sales clerk that sold me a pair of glasses, but instead a company whose numerous and faceless staff I interacted with, whose names I won't remember or really feel gratitude towards, and ultimately the creator of the lenses or the frames that have benefited my life and allowed me to see better, are people that I will never meet and never be able to give the satisfaction of saying, hey man, your glasses really changed my life. Another non-hypothetical example is that when I first went to college, I started in the culinary program because I figured people are always going to eat. Therefore, I should learn how to make food. This would be an excellent way to always have a fallback job, and the thing about that I soon realized, even though I was building technical skills that would allow me to cook better, I was also performing these skills in an environment that was very disconnected to the people who would be eating my food. I began to realize that most of the satisfaction that I would feel for making a meal is being able to sit down and eat with people that I want to have an experience with and that I want them to enjoy the food. But instead I found myself disconnected from the people enjoying my food, and I found that removes that satisfaction from the equation for me. Once I realized that this was the way the restaurant industry was going to be, it lost a lot of its appeal to me. See, my mother got put on disability when I was in high school. She actually applied in middle school, because that's when her MS got so bad that she had to quit working. It took about 2 to 3 years, stuck in the application process with no job, in which she was forced to raise a kid on no income and wasn't allowed to work before we got any sort of a benefit from the government at all. So if you think this is some easy street fix, it really isn't. It requires a lot of resources and a strong community to be able to weather the time that you're waiting for your application to be approved, which can be a very long process. And like during that time, sometimes we wouldn't be able to use the heat. Sometimes we wouldn't be able to use the phone. Sometimes Eventually, it actually got really easy to keep the internet on because I kept calling AOL and trying to cancel, and they'd end up giving me another free 6 months. I had like a year and a half of free internet from them just doing that. Like, I never paid them. I don't know what they were getting out of this except trying to keep their brand alive, but it was a really weird strategy. So we didn't really lose the internet that often, but if we lost our phone connection, that would cut the internet out as well. So we had to really juggle our bills and decide which ones we could afford to pay during that time. And it was a pretty rough way to live, and I would imagine a really tough way to raise a child. And sometimes it meant, like, a lot of my childhood, it meant that we couldn't use the heater in the winter. We just had to bundle up more. And I barely made it through high school because I had to miss so many days. Even though grades on the things I showed up for were still good, I ended up with an average of a D because they averaged my regular grade down to a 65 because I missed too many days. And the only thing that ever got me to pass any of my high school courses was the fact that I scored above a 95 on the final exams. That averages me out to about a D minus, which was enough to pass a class. And there were a lot of days when my mother was just too weak to get out of bed, and people still have to eat. So I found a lot of satisfaction in my teens in being able to learn new things to cook for her while I was taking care of her. And that level of satisfaction that I found in food, I realized would not be present in a commercial kitchen. So if capitalist work is so much more alienating than traditional jobs and labor that had us directly interfacing with the communities on the weight of our good name, what does capitalism currently present to us to make up for this? Where can we find this fulfillment if we are alienated from the course of labor? That we are alienated from in the course of labor. Well, capitalism is designed so that we can get that fulfillment through endless consumption, which is helpful for the capitalist system because it also needs endless growth for investments to keep the investor class happy and able to continuously expand their fortunes over generations, creating a problem of intergenerational wealth as capitalism tracks on. But the idea is that you may hate your job, but you like the things that money can buy for you, and you have to work to get that money. I think that for any of us, we can realize how hollow a distraction this is, even if we are particularly well paid. Really, it's not that we're getting fulfillment from this anymore. It feels as though it's become more the fear of the absolute destruction of poverty that keeps us motivated rather than the fulfillment that we actually get from buying things. Now, realizing that the average American on disability is potentially in the worst of these two worlds. They don't have a job, so naturally they're alienated from that satisfaction of being seen to do a good job and building a positive reputation in their community, generally speaking. And there are at least some ways around this that we will discuss later in the video, but in terms of the traditional cultural weight and that's assigned to a person's role in society, that's given from their job or their profession, typically. They do not have access to this by definition. But in addition to that, they're kept at such a low level of being just above the poverty line that just paying for daily concerns and maintaining a basic life becomes difficult. You don't have the money to buy the things that can even possibly give you that temporary feeling of fulfillment. Instead, you're left with basically no real fulfillment in your life at all. Now, I don't think it's healthy for us to expect to get our fulfillment from consumer goods, nor do I think that it's reasonable to expect to get it from most forms of capitalist labor. Honestly, I think that probably the biggest thing that socialist projects actually bring to the modern world, and something that we often have trouble finding elsewhere, that feeling of real fulfillment from helping someone else within our community. So like Marx, I see shifting towards socialist projects being a way to reduce the alienation that we feel that comes from the natural course of human fulfillment. But I don't think that this presents the same barriers for someone who is considered disabled under the current American system for entering into socialist work. Consider this. People in America on disability, they don't really have the money to do much more than pay their rent and stay at home. And when facing the systemic alienation of being completely alone, trapped in a little box, it can be very easy to lose sight of yourself as instrumental in your community. And it's easy to convince yourself that you are nothing and society thinks of you as nothing. There is a deep nihilism to just barely surviving in this world and being trapped and lonely like this. And it's by no means the destiny of people who entered the disability program. But I don't think it's terribly uncommon either. And for a lot of these people, you may also have health reasons that mainly keep you at home. People that get tired especially easy, which, naturally means they can't spend as much time outside of their home without having to return and recover. Among this community, there are any number of people who support our cause, because they see very directly through their own time to really dig in and investigate how capitalism is failing around us, in addition to the potential solutions that can be found through socialist projects. But the thing is that they may still feel the invalidation that's associated with the label of just being disabled in this country. They may feel like building a socialist movement would involve some sort of physical work that they might not be able to do. But the thing is, this just isn't the case. There are numerous disabled comrades out there who have, if nothing else, more than enough time to be able to help build socialist networks. The thing is, without leaving their homes, it can make it seem difficult for them to get the ball rolling. However, as we've seen through the pandemic, being able to work from home is not just a dream of the future. And for volunteer networks, this can also be the easiest way to organize. One example of this is when I volunteered for the Bernie Sanders campaign. Something that I made a video about, talking about the process for when I first started. And the first thing that I did after I joined up was to send out mass texts. And we would get these sent out about all sorts of things related to the cause, or just to get the word out about primaries, or a lot of other social issues, or things that were very specific to local campaigns that we would run in specific areas related to specific causes that affected them in their community. But all of this could be done through an app without even getting out of bed. You just send off a bunch of text, a certain amount of people will respond. I mean, even less of them really want to have a conversation with you. And if at any time you feel like you've bitten off more than you can chew, you can just hand the rest of your assignment to other volunteer workers. Using this system, we were able to, on certain days, send as many as millions of texts just through our volunteer network. The thing is that for our disabled comrades with all the time in the world, this gives them a way to not let their brain doom spiral about how bad the world is getting and how hopeless they feel. We haven't yet built the connections and the networks that would allow them to do this work easily and wirelessly for the cause, but they certainly have the time, and it certainly could be beneficial. Not only for us as socialist organizations, but for our disabled comrades as well. And I definitely think that this is an issue that if we can bridge that gap and bring in some of these people who have all the screen time and all this loss of meaning in their lives, and we could show them meaningful ways to benefit our communities that you could do from home. I know that there are plenty of volunteer organizations out there that would love to connect to people like that. You just have to have the time to volunteer from home and have steady internet access. I think that if this is a bridge that our movement can gap, we will have activated a powerful untapped resource that could push our movement forward from the comfort of their own homes and without any financial or physical investment from themselves. Because most of the things that they feel like they could do require some sort of money down, or for them to step up to the plate physically. And for this population of people, those are the two things that they often can't do, in comparison to the rest of the working population who might be able to do these two things, however, do not have the time to really act and volunteer within the community because of their work schedule. Our system has largely been set up to attract those workers and give them ways to plug themselves in, but we have put a bit too little effort into thinking about how we might enable our disabled comrades to be able to support our movements from their very own homes. Anyways, again, while I have close relationships caring for disabled loved ones at different points in my life, I'm not on the disability system myself, even though I am pretty familiar with it. So if this doesn't jive with your experience of disability in America, let me know in the comments. I would be very interested to hear your thoughts and your perspective and be able to bring it forward, because regardless of my thoughts here, regardless of if my thoughts here are 100% correct, I do think that you should be able to participate in this movement in the same way that everyone else can. And what that means for us as organizers is remembering that there are people out there for whom that time might be the only resource that they can easily give, because I think if we started to utilize people like that, we would be able to make some pretty massive advances overnight. Because, to be honest, we just can't do it without you.